Hey everyone, hope you're all keeping safe and hope this 10-minute monologue finds you in the best of your health. I introduce myself as Kaustubh, a second year medical student from JSS Medical College, Mysore. So, at the end of my talk, basically, that's based on purely my opinions and backed by research, is to make you question that is water privatization a changing trend or are we all missing the point? So, let's put on our thinking caps and get into it. Well, 1 billion people worldwide lack access to clean water, which results in millions of illnesses and deaths every year. The international financial institutions have blamed the lack of access of clean water on government corruption and deficient funding. The solution has been promoting the private provision of water services to increase the access to clean water. This adds on to the debates by arguing that the private provision of water services is a political choice and not an economic choice, and that the private provision of water does not inoculate the mission of the international financial institutions to decrease the poverty by increasing access to clean water. The private provisions of water services is not efficient because it's a national monopoly and it tends to increase the water cost and the service disconnections. The alternative solution promoted in my talk is strong democracy based on the right to water. Well, starting things, the term private provision is used to refer to the process of public sector contracting out the operations, the service delivery, and the user fee collection to the private sector. Well, water is one of the most basic human rights, as you all know. Yet, over a billion people in the world lack access to clean water. Additionally, almost half of the world's population has no access to sanitation, which escalates the risk of water contamination. Due to unclean water, one third of the people in the world suffer from preventable diseases every year. Without water connections, people either have to buy water from private vendors or collect water from sources that have not been purified. Well, private water vendors charge substantially 5 more per unit of the water than the public water systems charge. Clean water is essential and there is no substitute, and water services are a national monopoly, as I said. As a result, water services do not fit as a market good due to the lack of competition and alternatives. On the contrary, private provision aggravates the current lack of access to clean water problems. Since the promotion of private sector involvement is a choice, international financial institutions can best achieve their goals by choosing to stop the promotion of private provision of water services. People around the world are reclaiming their access to water as a basic human right by seizing control of the water supplies from private companies. Well, this matters because one of the biggest impacts of climate breakdown is to put the stress on water cycle. In a world increasingly prone to drought and flood, guaranteeing access to safe water supplies, especially for the most vulnerable, becomes an even greater challenge. The major debate on water issues lies on the perception of water as a right or a good. It is an ongoing struggle between viewing water as an economic commodity whose use and distribution is determined by profit or as a fundamental human right. Therefore, it's a simple dichotomy between economic efficiency and the basic welfare of human rights. Believers and supporters of the view as water as a human right challenge the view of privatization or the consideration of water as an economic good. They argue that commodification of water is ethically, environmentally, and socially wrong because it bases decisions of water allocation on commercial, not environmental or social justice consideration. Well, proponents of this view further refuse privatization because it entails principles of scarcity and profit maximization rather than the long-term sustainability in water management. They claim that some transnational corporations backed by the World Bank and International Monetary Fund are forcing the third world countries to abandon their public water delivery system and contract with their companies through what is called a structural adjustment. Well, it's very grim. The World Bank has predicted by 2025, two-thirds of the world's population will run short of the fresh drinking water. Given such a grim outlook, it comes as little surprise that the Fortune magazine recently defined water as the oil of 21st century. Isn't that funny? Poised to capitalize on the crisis are private companies, many of which are multinationals whose tentacles are probing the planet for opportunities to turn the misery of water starved regions into profits for their executives and their stockholders. Well, instead of protecting existing supplies, enhancing conservation efforts, or helping the vulnerable populations, more and more government officials throughout the world are turning to privatization, transferring the control of this precious resource from the public sector to the private sector. It is no underestimation to say that the very survival of untold millions of people could rest on decisions being made today, well, largely behind closed doors, in corporate boardrooms and government offices throughout the world. With each drop of water that falls into the hands of private interest, any sustainable solution to the global world crisis moves further and further away from the public's grasp. Corporations have utilized rate hikes to maximize profits, which by definition is their bottom line. This bottom line, is often coming at the expense of water quality and customer service, but not at the expense of maintaining inflated executive salaries. Among the more unseemly aspects of handling water as a marketable commodity rather than a basic human need, well, the poor are often denied access, as everyone knows. Because living without water is not an option. People are often forced to consume unsafe water, lest be faced with going on for food, medicine, or education for a long period of time. Well, when water services are privatized, very little can be done to ensure that the company, be it domestic, foreign, or transnational, will work in the best interest of the community. Furthermore, if a community is dissatisfied with the performance of the company, buying back the water rights is very difficult and costly proposition. Again, the prime directives of these water companies is to maximize their profits and not protect the consumers. Private financing costs more than the public financing. Well, this is a false perception that when water services are privatized, the financial burden will shift from the public to the private sector, which will save taxpayer money. But that's not true at all. Taxpayer public financing translates into lower cost projections, whereas the taxable private financing results in higher interest rate. As a result, consumers are also forced to make these higher payments on company loans. Well, massive layoffs can follow in the wake of privatization as companies try to minimize the cost and increase their profits. At times, service and water quality are put at risk due to understaffing. As a result, layoffs can be devastating not only to the workers and the families, but to consumers like us as well. Well, once a government agency hands over its water system to a private company, withdrawing from the agreement borders are near to impossible. Proving breach of contract is difficult and costly ordeal. Privatization can leave the poor with no access to clean water because, contrary to public assertions, World Bank and the IMF, schemes in the developing world usually result in the reduced access to water for the poor. Well, impoverished and politically enfeebled countries are hardly in the position to refuse these conditions, as doing so would cause them a default on their debts. As a result, the World Bank and IMF are able to provide lucrative and virtually risk-free contracts for multinationals. Well, due to the guaranteed rates of returns and investment protection clauses. Fully aware of bleak water supply, corporations are in a mad dash to obtain access to fresh water that they can sell at huge profits. It goes as high as 35% of the original cost. It goes without saying that those who control water supplies will exercise economic and political power at the most unimaginable degrees. Bulk water exports, that is, transporting water from water-rich countries to water-poor countries, could have disastrous consequences. Massive extraction of water from its natural sources can result in ecological imbalance and destruction. Disrupting aquifers by over extraction often damages the environment and socio-economic standards. Groundwater is being over extracted as it is, and once aquifers are emptied or polluted, they're almost impossible to restore. Well, I think it's high time to think about this question and ask ourselves, question our ideals, because it's high time for a change.